Hey everyone! Ready to dive deep into the world of It Feeds? Released on April 18, 2025, this film has sparked endless discussions, and today, we're uncovering every thrilling detail. If you enjoy this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us grow. And for more incredible movie explorations and hidden gems, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's unravel the magic behind this cinematic masterpiece. It Feeds premiered on April 18, 2025, and from that very first night, something strange began to stir in the air. Audiences weren't just watching another horror flick. They were slipping into something deeper, something colder, darker, and infinitely more personal. Directed by Archibald, a filmmaker who has always danced on the edges of grotesque and emotional vulnerability, this Canadian supernatural thriller delivered a visceral experience unlike anything seen in theaters in recent memory. It wasn't about gore or gratuitous shocks. It was about something that crept under your skin and made a home there. It Feeds is a haunting meditation on fear, trauma, and the monsters that flourish in silence. A film that understands that the most terrifying thing isn't what hides in the dark, it's what you let live there. The movie introduces us to Cynthia Winston, played with chilling restraint and raw emotional force by Greene, best known for her ethereal role in Twilight. But here, there's nothing dreamy about her presence. Cynthia is a clairvoyant therapist, a woman whose psychic sensitivity has left her more fractured than gifted. She and her teenage daughter Jordan run a quiet psychiatric practice from their eerie Victorian home, a setting that immediately sets the tone for the film's suffocating atmosphere. There's something off about their house, something in the shadows, something that watches. And when Riley, a young girl with wide eyes and a trembling voice, enters their lives, everything begins to spiral. Portrayed with heartbreaking intensity by newcomer Shaylin Martin, Riley speaks of an invisible entity that feeds on her. Not torments. Not haunts. Feeds. The simplicity of that premise hides the complexity of what It Feeds truly is. Because as Riley's condition worsens, it becomes clear that this isn't just a story about a possessed girl or a demonic force. It's a story about inherited pain. Emotional, psychological, maybe even spiritual. There are no priests, no rituals, no ancient texts to fall back on. There is only a mother, a daughter, and a girl begging to be saved. And the deeper Cynthia digs, the more personal the horror becomes. Her visions start bleeding into reality. Her past resurfaces, and the line between her identity and the entity begins to blur in terrifying ways. What makes the film extraordinary is how it handles that descent. Unlike many horror films that rush toward a third-act crescendo, It Feeds simmers. Archibald crafts tension like a surgeon. Every scene is laced with unease. A sound in the hall. A flicker of light. A breath on the back of someone's neck. The fear builds not through jump scares, but through careful, deliberate pacing. The cinematography is deliberately suffocating. Tight close-ups, long corridors, dim lighting that never quite reveals everything. The house becomes a character of its own, alive with secrets and dread. Shawn Ashmore's role as Randall, Riley's concerned father, adds another layer to the unfolding nightmare. He isn't just a frantic parent. He's a man torn between love, guilt, and helplessness. His chemistry with Cynthia creates a tension that's never quite romantic, but always charged. Then there's Julian Richings, a familiar face to horror fans, who plays a mysterious figure that emerges midway through the film. He's cryptic, unnerving, and possibly the only one who understands what's happening. Whether he's an ally or something else entirely remains unclear until the very end. And by then, the truth may already be too much to bear. Throughout the film, the visual and auditory design amplifies the horror tenfold. The entity feeding on Riley is never fully revealed until it must be, and even then, it's less a creature and more a distortion. A shadow without form. A hunger made manifest. The practical effects are stunning, a callback to classic horror where suggestion was more potent than spectacle. And the sound design is relentless. Every creak, every breath, every whisper seems engineered to keep your skin crawling. Even the score, muted, droning, often barely there, creates an atmosphere of sustained dread that refuses to let up. But underneath the supernatural is something even more unsettling. the emotional core. Cynthia's journey isn't just about defeating a monster. It's about facing herself, her guilt, her failures, her need to fix others because she never learned how to heal herself. The film suggests, in haunting metaphor, that trauma is infectious, that the pain we bury doesn't vanish, it festers. And sometimes, it takes shape. Sometimes, it feeds. By the time the climax arrives, it feeds has woven a web of fear and empathy so tight that you can't look away. Cynthia must make a choice. Not just to banish a spirit, but to sacrifice something of herself to save a child who has come to symbolize every unhealed wound she's ever ignored. The final confrontation is quiet, almost tragic. There are no explosions, no exorcisms. Just truth, and pain, and the question, how do you defeat something that lives inside you? When the credits roll, the silence in the theater is loud. This is not a movie that lets you leave unscathed. It lingers. It forces reflection. It demands that you think not about monsters, but about memories. About the voices we silence and the cries we ignore, especially the ones inside our own minds. It Feeds became a cultural phenomenon not because it shocked audiences, but because it moved them. Horror fans praised it for its elegance and restraint. Critics lauded its emotional intelligence and cinematic craftsmanship. And for many viewers, it became personal, a metaphor for struggles they knew all too well. Online discussions exploded. Theories flourished. Was the entity real? Was it all a projection of Riley's trauma? Was Cynthia herself feeding it unknowingly? Or had the house, with all its dark history, simply chosen a new host? The ambiguity is part of its power. It Feeds doesn't hold your hand. It invites interpretation. It becomes what you bring to it. That's what great horror does. It mirrors your fears back at you. In the weeks following its release, fans dissected every frame, every hallway shadow, every flickering candle, Easter eggs hidden in the wallpaper, the symbolic use of mirrors, the color shift in Jordan's clothing. It became more than a movie. It became a puzzle, an experience, a psychological labyrinth that demanded repeat viewings. And with each rewatch, something new surfaced. A look, a whisper, a flash of something in the background that shouldn't be there. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of It Feeds is its subtle truth. That there are wounds that don't heal cleanly. That grief can take shape. That fear can manifest. And that sometimes, when we don't deal with what's inside us, it finds a way to deal with us instead. It asks you to examine not what you're afraid of, but why. And in that way, it reaches beyond the screen. It touches something primal, something ancient. So if you're brave enough to look deeper, to let the silence settle and the shadows stretch, then It Feeds offers something rare, a horror story that doesn't just terrify, but transforms. And that's what makes it unforgettable. That's what makes it worth every whispered word, every sleepless night, and every careful step into the dark. Because in the end, the question isn't whether the monster is real. The question is, what has it already fed on? It all begins with a silence so dense it's almost suffocating. A sprawling Victorian house sits beneath a pale sky, its windows like eyes that have seen too much. The air is still, the color palette muted, and a soft hum, barely perceptible, builds like a warning from somewhere just out of view. It Feeds doesn't waste time with a bang. It begins with a whisper, and that whisper quickly becomes a cry that refuses to be unheard. Cynthia Winston moves like someone perpetually bracing for impact. Played with haunting depth by Greene, she's not the stereotypical horror heroine. She's guarded, measured, and impossibly weary. There's something in her gaze that hints at old wounds, something in the way she speaks to her daughter Jordan that suggests their relationship has been molded more by survival than by warmth. Jordan, played by Ellie O'Brien, is clever, a bit distant, maybe too mature for her age. Their bond is not cold, but cautious, as though both know there are things they've never said aloud, and maybe never will. Their home-based psychiatric practice is unconventional. Clients don't just come for therapy. Some come for clarity, others for peace, and a few for help with things they can't even name. Cynthia, with her clairvoyant ability, has grown used to walking that delicate line between skepticism and the supernatural. She reads people well, too well, and it's that gift, or curse, that first alerts her to something terribly wrong when Riley enters their lives. Riley is just 12, but she looks older, not physically, but emotionally. There's something ancient in the way she carries herself, something hollow behind her eyes. Played with startling nuance by Shaylin Martin, she instantly shifts the atmosphere in every scene she inhabits. When her father Randall, portrayed with quiet intensity by Shawn Ashmore, brings her in, there's desperation in his voice. Not panic, not fear, but desperation, the kind that builds after sleepless nights and answers that never come. Riley hasn't been sleeping. She's not eating. She talks to someone, or something, that no one else can see. And then there's her voice when she finally speaks the words that change everything. It feeds on me when I dream. The tension doesn't come from screams or spectacle. It's in the stillness of the room after Riley says it. In Cynthia's barely perceptible reaction. In the long pause before anyone says anything else. Something about Riley's presence unsettles Cynthia deeply, and the movie lets us sit in that discomfort. From that moment, the story begins to unwind like a slow-motion collapse. Cynthia starts having strange visions again, fragmented images from her past, distorted memories, shadows that don't belong to anything. She hasn't had these visions in years, and now, they return with a vengeance. Jordan, meanwhile, is suspicious of Riley. Not hostile, but guarded. She notices the way animals react to her, the way the temperature drops in her presence, and how Cynthia begins to behave differently, as if being around Riley is dredging up parts of her she thought she'd buried. But Jordan also sees something else, how scared Riley is. And despite the creeping dread that grows around her, she finds herself drawn to the girl. There's something about Riley that feels familiar, like looking into a broken mirror. As the days pass, the strangeness escalates. Riley speaks of a dark figure with no face that stands by her bed at night. She says it watches her sleep, waits until her eyes close. Then the feeding begins. Not with teeth or claws, but with cold, numbing terror. Cynthia tries to frame these claims through the lens of trauma. She believes Riley is manifesting pain, possibly from abuse, perhaps from a tragic loss. But when objects begin moving on their own, when unexplained bruises appear on Cynthia's arms after she falls asleep near Riley, it becomes clear something else is at play. Randall, helpless and terrified, reveals more about their past. Riley began acting strangely after the death of her mother, but her descent into this state of possession, or whatever this is, didn't truly begin until they moved into their new home. He begs Cynthia to do whatever it takes to help, no matter how unconventional. His desperation is palpable. But Cynthia hesitates. She knows what it means to confront the unknown. She's seen what happens when you open a door to that side of reality, and she's not sure she can do it again. Flashbacks begin to bleed into the present. We see glimpses of Cynthia's past. Another child, another entity, another failure. A child she couldn't save. The guilt is suffocating. She promised herself she'd never try again. But here Riley is, and with every passing hour, her light dims a little more. Then comes the night where everything shifts. Cynthia awakens in the middle of the night, sweat-soaked, to the sound of whispering. But there's no one in her room. She wanders through the house and finds Jordan standing in front of Riley's room, paralyzed. There's a sound coming from inside. A low, rhythmic growl, not animal, not human. Cynthia opens the door. And what she sees isn't shown to us. The camera lingers on her face, on the pure terror that overtakes her, the way her knees almost buckle. She slams the door shut and locks it. From that moment, the film's rhythm changes. The entity is no longer content with hiding. It makes its presence felt, in cold spots, in scratches on the walls, in Cynthia's own body. Her visions become more intense, more violent. And slowly, a theory forms. What if this thing isn't feeding on Riley's fear? What if it's feeding on pain? On memories? On guilt? The house begins to decay around them. Hallways stretch longer than they should. Shadows flicker in ways that defy physics. And Jordan sees it too. Not just the monster, but the effect it's having on her mother. Cynthia is unraveling, and Jordan is terrified she might lose her, again. We learn, through a quiet, heartbreaking scene, that Cynthia once attempted to take her own life. It was Jordan who found her, who saved her, and she's not willing to lose her mother again, no matter what Riley brings into their home. But Cynthia is determined. She believes that if she can tap into Riley's subconscious, if she can reach the part of her that still remembers joy, she can fight this thing. And so she attempts an unorthodox therapy session, one that blends psychic connection with hypnotic regression. What happens during that session is one of the film's most unforgettable sequences. We enter Riley's mind, a dreamscape of decay and dread. A crumbling house, flooded with black water, and at the center, a mirror that reflects not Riley, but something monstrous. As Cynthia tries to reach her, the entity lashes out, not just in Riley's mind, but in the physical world. Lights explode. Doors slam. Cynthia is thrown across the room. Riley screams, and the mirror shatters. When Cynthia wakes up, hours have passed. Riley is unconscious, Jordan is shaken, and something has changed. Cynthia feels it. The thing inside Riley knows who she is now. It's no longer hiding. It wants Cynthia to see, to remember, to understand. And it wants her broken. That night, as Cynthia sits alone in her room, she sees it clearly for the first time, standing in the doorway. A shape, a distortion. Not flesh, not shadow, but something in between. It doesn't speak. It doesn't move. But its presence is unbearable. Cynthia whispers one word, "Why?" And the thing tilts its head, as if curious. Then it vanishes. From that moment, Cynthia knows. This isn't just about Riley. This thing feeds on more than one soul. It's been feeding on her, on Jordan, maybe on everyone who's ever stepped foot in that house. And it's growing stronger. With the pieces beginning to fall into place, Cynthia resolves to uncover the truth behind the entity's origins. She begins researching the house, the land, and finds something disturbing. A series of disappearances tied to the property. Children, mostly, all claimed to have vanished in their sleep. All connected by a single, cryptic phrase recorded in forgotten therapy journals. It feeds when we forget. Whatever this entity is, it thrives in silence, in shame, in trauma left unspoken. And now, as Cynthia prepares for the confrontation she tried to avoid all her life, she realizes the battle ahead isn't just for Riley's soul. It's for hers. For Jordan's. For every buried truth and unspoken grief. And if she fails again, the entity will not be content to fade into the walls. It will devour everything. But before Cynthia can act, something happens. Riley vanishes. And with her disappearance, the darkness begins to bleed from the corners of the house. The feeding has only just begun. Riley's disappearance sends the house into a near-feral state of chaos. The silence that follows is not peace. It's tension, heavy and vibrating, like the air before a storm finally breaks. Cynthia searches every room, every shadow, her breathing shallow, her fingers trembling. Jordan screams Riley's name, but her voice is swallowed by something, some presence, that now feels like it has wrapped itself around the house completely. There are no signs of struggle, no trail to follow, just the unbearable sense that Riley is still in the house, but hidden in a way that bends the rules of reality. Cynthia doesn't call the police. She knows they wouldn't understand, and maybe more terrifyingly, they wouldn't even believe Riley was ever there. Already, she's finding traces of the girl beginning to vanish, drawings disappearing from sketchpads, her voice erased from voice memos Cynthia had saved for therapy notes. This entity isn't just feeding. It's erasing, consuming, rewriting. Cynthia realizes that this is what it always intended. Riley wasn't the only target. She was a conduit, a catalyst. In a desperate attempt to locate her, Cynthia undergoes another trance session, this time without safeguards, exposing herself completely to the spiritual tether she once tried to sever. As she sinks into the psychic plane, the house dissolves into a distorted version of itself. Walls throb like lungs, floors stretch and twist beneath her feet. And there, in a locked room that doesn't exist in the real world, she finds Riley, sitting cross-legged, her eyes pure black, whispering something over and over again. It wasn't always mine. I gave it a name, and that gave it power. The revelation hits like thunder. Riley didn't summon the entity. She named it. She gave it a story, a shape, and by doing so, she allowed it to grow beyond her. But Cynthia sees something else in this dreamscape. A second mirror, untouched, intact. When she looks into it, she sees herself, not as she is now, but as she was years ago, in the aftermath of the child she failed to save. That failure wasn't an accident. The entity had fed on her grief even then, and she had unknowingly allowed it to continue by refusing to forgive herself. The mirror begins to crack as Cynthia stares at it, not because the entity attacks, but because she finally admits her guilt aloud. And in that moment of emotional clarity, the landscape shifts. Riley turns to her, her eyes returning to normal, and they both run as the house collapses around them. Cynthia jerks awake from the trance, screaming, only to find Jordan clutching her hand, terrified, saying she had stopped breathing. And then comes the knock at the door. It's Randall. But something is wrong. His face is pale, eyes hollow. He says he found Riley. That she's outside, in the car, but she won't speak. Cynthia's instincts scream at her that something's off. She steps outside cautiously. The car is empty. She turns back, and Randall is gone. The door slams shut. Jordan is inside. Alone. From this moment, it feeds kicks into full psychological horror. Time fractures. Cynthia runs through the house that now loops endlessly. Staircases that lead back to the same hallway. Clocks spinning out of control. Portraits changing their faces when she's not looking. And worst of all, she hears Jordan's voice calling out to her. Sometimes from above. Sometimes from beneath the floorboards. Always scared. Always just out of reach. The entity begins speaking now, not in language, but in echoes, mimicking voices Cynthia knows and trusts. Her mother's lullabies. Her own voice whispering doubts. Riley's soft laughter. It wears their sounds like a mask, drawing her deeper into isolation. But Cynthia remembers the trance, the mirror, the confession, the moment of clarity. And she begins to understand the entity's weakness. It doesn't feed on fear alone. It feeds on repression, on denial, on emotional wounds left untreated. She finds Jordan in the attic, held in place by a web of memories. Visions of her as a child, watching her mother try to die. The guilt Jordan carries has made her vulnerable, too. Cynthia approaches, not with defiance, but with truth. She tells Jordan she's sorry. Not just for what happened, but for never speaking about it. For pretending everything was fine. And in that act of raw honesty, the web begins to unravel. They descend together, mother and daughter, now bonded by truth instead of secrets. And they find Riley, barely conscious, surrounded by manifestations of the entity, which now appears in full form. It's not a monster in the traditional sense. It's shifting faces. It's broken voices. It's the physical embodiment of unspoken trauma. The final battle is not one of fists or spells. It's psychic, emotional, symbolic. Cynthia stands before the entity and begins to name every failure she's ever buried. Every secret. Every truth she's denied. Jordan does the same. Then Riley, tears streaming, speaks of her mother's death. Not as a tragedy to be avoided, but a grief she was never allowed to express. Each confession wounds the entity. Each truth makes it flicker. And then Cynthia does something unexpected. She embraces it. Literally. She steps forward, arms open, and pulls the creature, now shrinking, flickering, screaming, into an embrace. "You're part of me," she says. "But you don't get to control me anymore." With that, the entity lets out a final, distorted cry and vanishes. The house doesn't explode. It doesn't crumble. It simply exhales. The tension lifts. The air warms. Morning light filters in through the windows for the first time in what feels like days. Riley collapses into Randall's arms. Jordan and Cynthia hold each other in silence. In the days that follow, the house remains quiet. Cynthia closes her practice, not out of fear, but because she's finally realized she needs healing, too. Jordan begins drawing again. Bright, vibrant images of forests and stars. Riley, though still scarred, begins speaking in full sentences again, laughter returning to her like sunlight after a storm. The final scene mirrors the opening. Cynthia stands outside the house, watching the wind move through the trees. She smiles faintly, as if finally at peace. But just before the credits roll, there's a flicker in the window. A brief distortion. A whisper, so faint you could almost miss it. It always leaves a part of itself behind. And with that, it leaves us not with terror, but with a question that lingers like a shadow at the edge of light. What do we really bury when we move on, and what might still be feeding in the quiet corners of our life? Hey everyone! Ready to dive deep into the world of It Feeds? Released on April 11th, 2025, this film has sparked endless discussions, and today, we're uncovering every thrilling detail. If you enjoy this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us grow. And for more incredible movie explorations and hidden gems, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's unravel the magic behind this cinematic masterpiece. At the heart of It Feeds is Cynthia Hargrove, a once celebrated child psychologist now quietly surviving in the aftermath of her own unspoken grief. Cynthia is the kind of character who seems composed on the outside, methodical, gentle, even clinical at times. But just beneath that calm surface is a sea of unresolved pain. Her past is like a mirror turned to the wall, ignored but always present. That pain, carefully hidden behind professional demeanor and ritualistic behavior, becomes the perfect breeding ground for the entity. Because it feeds not just on fear, but on repression, Cynthia's emotional paralysis becomes more than a flaw, it becomes a doorway. Elizabeth Shue, in a performance that's equal parts haunting and heartbreakingly grounded, brings Cynthia to life with such precision that her stillness speaks louder than her words. Every time Cynthia pauses before answering, every flicker of her gaze, every strained smile, these small, masterful choices by Shue turn Cynthia into a living metaphor for unresolved trauma. She doesn't play Cynthia as a traditional scream queen or a wide-eyed protagonist. She gives us a woman who's been quietly breaking for years, and who only begins to mend by being forced to face the very darkness she's tried to compartmentalize. Then there's Jordan, Cynthia's teenage daughter, portrayed with piercing intensity by Kylie Rogers. Jordan is sharp, sarcastic, and emotionally walled off in the way only teenagers with deep emotional scars can be. She carries her own trauma, not just from her father's abandonment but from growing up with a mother who never truly opened up to her. At first, Jordan seems like the typical rebellious daughter, sneaking out, slamming doors, but the film slowly peels that surface away. What emerges is a young girl who is desperate to connect, but afraid that doing so will reopen wounds she was never taught how to manage. Kylie Rogers' performance feels like a revelation. She brings an authenticity that makes Jordan's emotional walls feel heartbreakingly believable. The way she flips from rage to vulnerability in a single scene, like the moment she lashes out at Cynthia only to break down moments later, reveals a young woman who's both terrified of her mother and terrified for her. Their relationship is the spine of the story, and as Cynthia unravels, Jordan becomes the reluctant anchor that holds the family together, even while barely holding herself together. But it's Riley who embodies the film's most complex emotional journey. The foster child who barely speaks at the beginning, who draws unnerving pictures and hides beneath her bed. Riley feels less like a child and more like a ghost from the start. And yet, as the film progresses, we realize she's not the source of the evil, she's the vessel. She didn't create the entity. She gave it a name. And with that name came power. But Riley's story is not just about possession. It's about how children internalize the pain of their environments. The entity doesn't just use her, it feeds off what she represents. A lifetime of being ignored, misunderstood, and moved like luggage from one broken home to another. Millie Shapiro's portrayal of Riley is chilling, not because she plays her as overtly creepy, but because she doesn't. Riley is quiet, thoughtful, and profoundly sad. Her expressions hold the weight of someone far older than her years, and there's a specific kind of terror in watching such a small, soft-spoken child become the epicenter of a supernatural storm. Shapiro never once lets the performance fall into cliché. She lets the horror bleed through in the stillness, The unblinking stares, the whispered phrases, the way she clutches her drawings as if they're lifelines. By the time Riley starts whispering to herself in a trance-like state, we don't just feel fear, we feel heartbreak. Because we know this child is not just possessed. She's haunted by the world. Yet It Feeds wouldn't strike as deep as it does without Randall, Cynthia's ex-husband and Jordan's estranged father, who returns midway through the film. At first glance, Randall seems like a plot device, a way to bring tension into the household. But his role evolves into something more symbolic. He's the physical manifestation of generational avoidance. Randall never fully processed the fallout of their divorce, nor the emotional damage it left behind. He tries to step back into the family unit like nothing ever happened, hoping to plug the gaps with charisma and charm. But his return forces everyone, Cynthia, Jordan, even Riley, to reckon with the parts of themselves they've buried. David Harbour delivers a complex, emotionally restrained performance. He doesn't play Randall as a villain. He plays him as a man weighed down by mistakes, trying to fix things too late. His scenes with Jordan ache with a quiet sadness, like two people pretending a bridge wasn't burned long ago. And when Randall begins seeing glimpses of the entity himself, we see his confidence dissolve, replaced by something raw. Fear, yes, but also shame. He doesn't want to be a hero. He just doesn't want to disappear from their lives again. Supporting characters in It Feeds are few but potent. There's Dr. Marlene Chow, Cynthia's former mentor, who appears briefly but memorably as the voice of rationality. Played by Shorahag Dashlu, her presence anchors the psychological realism of the film. She's the one who suggests that Cynthia's trauma may be manifesting in ways she refuses to admit. Her brief scenes serve as a reminder that Cynthia's unraveling didn't begin with Riley. It began long ago, in the quiet corners of her own history. And then there's the house itself. It may not be a person, but it acts like one. It breathes. It listens. It changes. The architecture shifts subtly from scene to scene, not enough to draw attention, but enough to make viewers feel like they're losing their bearings. The house becomes an extension of the characters' internal states, unpredictable, unstable, always threatening to collapse under the weight of its secrets. It becomes especially tied to Riley, echoing her feelings through the temperature of a room or the way shadows stretch unnaturally in her presence. Production designer Eve Stewart and cinematographer Rachel Morrison transform the house into a living entity, and in doing so, give it character and menace equal to any human figure. As Cynthia moves toward catharsis, so do the others around her. Her transformation isn't heroic in the classic sense. It's quiet, painful, and deeply human. She learns to stop running from the past, to stop shielding her daughter from the truth, and to finally let herself feel the weight of her regrets. This emotional openness spreads like a ripple effect. Jordan begins to trust again, Riley begins to heal, and even Randall finds space for redemption. In the end, it's not exorcism or ancient spells that defeat the entity. It's vulnerability, truth, connection. These characters don't win by surviving. They win by changing, by letting go of what hurt them. And that's what makes It Feeds more than just a horror film. It's a story about emotional inheritance, about how silence can become a curse, and how breaking that silence might be the only way to stop feeding what hides in the dark. And as the credits roll and the final whisper lingers in the air, what stays with you isn't just the fear, it's the people. The beautifully broken, achingly real people who reminded us that the scariest monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes, they live in our memories, in the things we never said, in the parts of ourselves we thought we had buried for good. In It Feeds, the horror lives not just in the shadows and the screams, but in the quiet details, those blink and you miss it moments that whisper rather than shout, luring us deeper into its layered narrative. The brilliance of this film lies in its refusal to handhold, choosing instead to scatter its secrets like breadcrumbs through set design, dialogue, and the movement of its characters. From the first frame to the last, It Feeds dares you to pay attention, and those who do are richly rewarded. The film opens not with a scream or a jump scare, but with a painting, a surreal, oil-washed depiction of a child surrounded by a circle of faceless adults. It hangs in Cynthia's office, seemingly a set decoration, but its presence is deliberate. That painting is a reimagining of Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare, a classic Gothic image that once symbolized sleep paralysis and the presence of a demonic force pressing on one's chest. In It Feeds, that reinterpretation becomes a visual thesis for what's to come. A child burdened by the unseen horrors of adult neglect. It's the first subtle whisper of the film's thesis. Trauma passed down, unspoken, unaddressed. That painting also connects to Riley's drawings. Throughout the movie, we see her sketching figures with hollow eyes and elongated limbs, figures that eerily resemble the adults in the painting. It's not just coincidence. The film implies that Riley has either seen the painting before or, more chillingly, that the entity is planting the same image across different minds. These drawings also change subtly. Early sketches show the creature as distant, almost hesitant. But after the closet door scene, where Riley first openly speaks of the voice that wants in, the figures in her notebook lean closer, becoming more detailed, more human. It's a visual indicator of the entity gaining power through acknowledgement. Cynthia's keychain, a simple trinket most would overlook, bears the symbol of a tree with twisted roots. It's the same symbol carved faintly into the underside of Riley's bed, visible for only a moment when Cynthia drops her phone during a late-night search. That emblem represents the Tree of Woe, an archaic folkloric symbol for generational suffering. In a deleted scene briefly teased in the trailer, Cynthia refers to it as something I saw in a book my mother used to read, hinting that the entity may have been part of her life far earlier than she realizes. It's a subtle way the film suggests that trauma, and possibly even the entity itself, didn't begin with Riley. The monster is old, passed through whispers and shared silences from one generation to the next. Even the house itself is designed to tell a story. The wallpaper in Riley's room is adorned with delicate vines, but upon closer inspection, the pattern changes. In earlier scenes, the vines are orderly, climbing upward. By the third act, after the possession deepens, the vines twist downward, choking themselves. It's never addressed directly, but the implication is clear. The environment is reflecting Riley's internal state, or perhaps being reshaped by the malevolent force inhabiting her. Similarly, the hallway outside Cynthia's bedroom grows longer with each passing night. The first time Cynthia walks it, it's about 7 steps to her door. The final time? 11. Spatial distortion, subtle and insidious, becomes a metaphor for Cynthia's unraveling sense of self and safety. In one of the film's most jarring yet quiet scenes, Cynthia revisits a dusty old VHS tape, home footage of Jordan's birthday party years earlier. The scene plays out innocuously at first, showing laughter, cake, singing. But in the background, just for a flash, a silhouette passes behind a window. It's never acknowledged by Cynthia. She doesn't see it. But we do. And it looks exactly like the figure that begins to haunt her in her dreams later on. This retroactive foreshadowing plants the seed that the entity has been circling the family far longer than anyone realized. It's not just feeding, it's waiting, calculating. Dialogues, too, are loaded with hidden meaning. When Riley first speaks about the voice, she never says it's a monster. She says, it's sad. It just wants to be heard. This line resonates powerfully with Cynthia's recurring nightmare, where she's in a room full of people screaming, yet no one hears her. The connection is subtle but thematic. The entity may be supernatural, but its essence is profoundly human. It embodies the pain of not being listened to, the ache of unresolved sorrow. It's also worth noting that Riley's words mirror something Cynthia once said to a patient in an earlier session. Most of the time, children act out because they're trying to be seen. The repetition of this sentiment across characters becomes a haunting echo, suggesting that the monster isn't born. It's summoned, created by silence and neglect. Music also plays a hidden role in shaping the emotional terrain. The recurring lullaby that Riley hums was composed for the film with a unique motif. It uses a descending minor scale followed by a sustained discordant note. That lingering, out-of-place note gives the melody a feeling of discomfort, like something familiar that's been warped. Later, when Cynthia begins hearing the lullaby in her dreams, that final discordant note becomes a trigger, signaling the entity's approach. It's an auditory clue, one that subtly trains the viewer's ears to anticipate dread before it arrives on screen. Even the choice of books on the shelves in the background reveals deeper layers. On Jordan's nightstand is The Velveteen Rabbit, a children's book about becoming real through the experience of being loved and eventually discarded. The parallel is unmistakable. Jordan, like the rabbit, fears being forgotten, becoming invisible to those who once cared. Meanwhile, Riley is seen clutching a torn copy of Coraline, a novel about a child discovering an alternate world filled with dark mirrors of her reality. These literary references aren't random. They mirror the characters' internal journeys, and their placement is as deliberate as any line of dialogue. In one of the most disturbing but subtle Easter eggs, the mirror in the upstairs bathroom reveals its true nature only once, when Jordan brushes her teeth and briefly looks away. For a single frame, her reflection remains fixed, watching her even after she turns. The effect is so fleeting it becomes almost subconscious, but it primes the audience with unease, suggesting that whatever is in the house isn't just lurking in corners. It's observing, mimicking, learning. When Randall makes his first appearance, he gives Jordan a stuffed animal from her childhood, a bunny missing one ear. It seems like a touching, if awkward, gesture. But later in the film, that same stuffed animal appears in Riley's room, despite her never having seen it before. The camera never lingers on it. It's there in a single shot, buried among her drawings. The implication? The entity is bridging memories, pulling fragments from one mind to influence another. It blurs the line between memory and manipulation. Perhaps the most haunting hidden detail appears in the film's final act. During Cynthia's climactic confrontation with the entity in the basement, a scene drenched in sweat, sorrow, and flickering light, she screams out her daughter's name, hoping to anchor herself to reality. But just as she does, the entity answers in Jordan's voice. The line it speaks? I forgive you. It's subtle, almost missed in the chaos, but chilling in its implications. The entity doesn't just imitate. It listens. It knows what Cynthia needs most, absolution, and weaponizes it. It twists healing into horror. And then there's the ending. As the family packs up the house and drives away, Riley looks back one last time. In the back window, reflected faintly, we see a face. Not a monster. A woman. Crying. It's the same face from a photograph briefly glimpsed in the hallway earlier in the movie. A photo of Cynthia's mother, who died under unclear circumstances. The implication is ambiguous, but unmistakable. Perhaps the entity isn't just a single presence. Perhaps it's a chain, a chorus of unresolved grief passed down like heirlooms. The story might be over for now, but its roots go deeper. These hidden details don't just reward repeat viewings. They change the way we understand the story itself. It feeds isn't content with surface-level scares. It burrows into your subconscious, planting symbols and echoes that only bloom days later. It's a film that asks you to watch closely, to listen carefully, and to think deeply, not just about what's on screen, but about the things we carry with us when the credits roll. And when all is said and done, when the whispers fade and the lights come back on, what stays with us isn't just what the entity took, but what it revealed. Behind the haunting atmosphere of It Feeds lies a production story just as eerie and fascinating as the film itself. What began as a straightforward psychological horror film slowly transformed into an artistic experiment that blurred the line between fiction and reality. From strange coincidences on set to controversial casting choices, the making of It Feeds unfolded like a chilling narrative of its own, leaving cast and crew members forever altered by the experience. It all started with the director, Eliza Moreno, who had a very specific vision for what It Feeds needed to become. She didn't want to make a conventional horror movie. She wanted something more psychological, more emotionally raw, and she insisted on casting actors who had personal experiences that paralleled their characters. This controversial casting approach led her to Catherine Lee, who plays Cynthia. At first, Catherine wasn't even planning to audition. She was recovering from a real-life custody battle and grappling with anxiety. But when Moreno read about her in an interview and saw an old audition tape from a different film, she reached out directly. Catherine later said that playing Cynthia was like living through her own worst memories again, but with someone yelling "cut" at the end. Catherine's method approach to Cynthia was relentless. She refused to read the entire script in one sitting, preferring to receive it scene by scene as filming progressed, just as her character would unravel piece by piece. That technique caused some friction with the production team but also created a performance that felt raw, immediate, and unpredictably human. In one particularly difficult scene, where Cynthia breaks down in front of a mirror, Catherine wasn't told the camera was already rolling. Moreno simply left her alone with a prop therapist's journal and recorded her real-time reaction to the written notes. The tears that followed weren't part of the script. They were real. The production design of the house, which becomes a character in its own right, posed unique challenges. Instead of building a set, the crew rented a real home in the Pacific Northwest known locally as the Dagger House, a century-old structure with its own history of hauntings. Moreno claimed she chose it not for the rumors but for its geometry, which had long hallways, narrow staircases, and an unnatural number of mirrors. But the cast and crew were not immune to the eerie atmosphere. During filming, multiple team members reported equipment failing inexplicably whenever they shot in the upstairs hallway. Sound mics would cut out, lights would dim without power changes, and camera footage from certain angles would turn up warped, as if the frames had been stretched. One of the most disturbing incidents involved a sound technician who collapsed during a night shoot. He later said he heard whispering through his headphones, words he couldn't understand, but that didn't sound human. When he played back the audio, nothing unusual was captured, yet he refused to return to the location. Another crew member, a grip named Lena, quietly quit after saying she saw a figure standing in the backyard for 3 consecutive nights. Always in the same position, always just out of focus. The child actors on set were treated with extraordinary care, given the film's dark themes. But what's most remarkable is that Riley, played by the breakout star Luna Prescott, improvised several of the film's eeriest lines. The "It Wants to Be Heard" line was her own addition. Moreno allowed Luna to write a private journal in character, and many of the film's scenes drew directly from Luna's writings. The director later said Luna had an uncanny ability to tap into the character's emotional state, so much so that one of the writers joked she must have been haunted herself. Luna, for her part, found the experience fun, and was often seen skipping between scenes humming her character's haunting lullaby. Speaking of the lullaby, the music in It Feeds carries a fascinating backstory. Composer Armand Hale recorded much of the score using unconventional instruments, including detuned children's toys and a warped xylophone he found at a thrift store. One of the signature sounds in the score is actually the slowed-down creak of a child's rocking chair, processed through analog tape to create an unsettling, droning moan. Hale admitted he spent nights alone in his studio intentionally trying to scare himself to capture the film's psychological tone. The filming schedule was deliberately disorienting. Moreno shot the movie out of chronological order to keep the actors mentally off balance. The scene where Cynthia discovers Jordan in the basement, the emotional climax, was actually filmed during the first week. Catherine was intentionally not allowed to meet the actor playing Jordan until that day, ensuring her shock and motherly panic were rooted in real, unscripted confusion. Even Luna Prescott was kept away from Catherine outside of scenes until halfway through production, creating a genuine sense of distance between the characters. One especially bizarre challenge came during post-production when the editors noticed something odd in multiple cuts. In background shots, especially during mirror scenes, there would be unexplained flickers or shadows not in the raw footage. Editors initially blamed glitches or lighting inconsistencies. But after reviewing the same scenes dozens of times, some began to believe the film had captured something extra, unintentional images that aligned eerily with the story's themes. These frames were eventually removed, but some versions of the trailer released internationally still contain a few. Even the marketing of It Feeds embraced the film's psychological edge. The first teaser didn't show any footage from the movie. It featured only static, the sound of breathing, and a child whispering, "Do you hear it too?" The campaign played heavily on ambiguity, fear of the unknown, and the power of suggestion. One promotional stunt placed cryptic drawings, said to be Riley's, in random public spaces, park benches, elevators, school notice boards, signed only with the phrase, "It feeds when you look away." The campaign sparked online theories and mini-investigations, with fans creating timelines and backstories long before the movie even dropped. Controversy surrounded the film after its release when it was discovered that some of the background extras in the mental hospital scenes were not actors but real patients from a closed institution. While this was done with consent and under tight supervision, critics questioned the ethics of blurring fiction and reality in such a raw, intimate way. Moreno defended the decision, arguing that it brought authenticity to the film's portrayal of psychological trauma, but it remained a divisive choice in the critical community. Another point of contention was the ending. Originally, the film ended with a much more graphic sequence involving Cynthia being consumed by the entity in a nightmarish sequence of surrealist horror. But test audiences found it too disturbing, and the ending was reshot to the more ambiguous, emotional farewell we now see. That original ending, dubbed The Feeding, exists only as a rough cut with limited crew access. Still, rumors persist that it may be released as part of a director's cut or anniversary edition, if viewers dare to see it. Through it all, It Feeds became not just a movie but a phenomenon. Every element, from casting to design, scoring to marketing, was built on the edge of the uncanny. It blurred the line between fiction and experience, crafted a living, breathing story that felt less like a tale told and more like a shared secret. The film lingers, not just because of what we saw, but because of what we felt, what we wondered about when the lights went out. And in that shadowy space where the audience is left unsure, where truth slips just out of reach and the sound of breathing might not be your own, that's where It Feeds continues to thrive. There's a peculiar rhythm to It Feeds, a slow, deliberate pulse that guides you through its darkness, gently at first, then with mounting pressure until you can barely breathe. At the heart of this film lie a series of moments, carefully orchestrated beats, that do more than push the plot forward. They linger. They unsettle. They turn the film from a simple psychological thriller into something deeply human and profoundly unsettling. And as viewers sit with the story, long after the credits roll, it's these moments that echo in memory, refusing to fade. One of the earliest and most unnerving scenes unfolds in what should be a moment of calm. Cynthia, played with harrowing vulnerability by Catherine Lee, tucks Riley into bed for the night. It's a quiet, warm-lit room, a lullaby softly playing in the background. But just as Cynthia leans in to kiss her daughter goodnight, Riley whispers, "Don't let it in." The line, though simple, drops like a stone into the audience's chest. It's not said with fear, but with eerie certainty, as if Riley knows something Cynthia doesn't. That single sentence reframes everything that came before it and casts a shadow over what's to come. It's a masterclass in minimalism. No loud music, no sudden jumps, just the subtle invasion of dread. This moment resonates so deeply because it shifts the emotional balance of the film. Until then, Cynthia appears to be the protector, the anchor of stability. But here, the roles invert. Riley becomes the seer, the one with knowledge beyond her years, while Cynthia, for all her adult rationality, becomes the one in the dark. This theme, of children bearing truths adults can't comprehend, threads through the film and touches a primal fear. The idea that the people we're meant to protect may already understand the danger more intimately than we do. As the story progresses, the bathtub sequence arrives like a psychological rupture. Cynthia, left alone while Riley stays at school late, begins to hear a rhythmic knocking from within the walls. It's soft at first, dismissible, but it grows louder, syncopating with her heartbeat. The camera lingers uncomfortably close as she steps into the bathroom, where condensation fogs the mirror and the air feels too still. She places her ear to the tile. Silence. Then, a whisper. Not a clear word, just the shape of one. This is the first time the audience hears the voice of it, not as a creature, but as something within. The bathtub begins to fill on its own, and without warning, Cynthia is pulled under, not by hands, but by gravity that shouldn't exist. The tension here isn't just visual, it's existential. The film strips away her sense of autonomy, her ability to trust her own senses. That's what makes the scene so disturbing, not what happens, but what it implies. That reality is becoming porous, and her grasp on it is slipping. Audiences reported holding their breath through the entire sequence. Many critics pointed out how Moreno refrained from using traditional horror cues, no swelling violin, no screeching sting. Just the hiss of water, the quiet gasps of a woman drowning in something no one else can see. And then comes the basement. Oh, the basement. That dark, liminal space beneath the house is used throughout the film as a metaphor for the subconscious, buried trauma, forgotten memories, repressed grief. But its most important scene arrives when Cynthia, following Riley's drawings, uncovers a locked door beneath a false panel. She opens it with a key Riley said came in her dream. Inside, she finds a single child's shoe and a photograph that shouldn't exist. Cynthia as a child, standing with a woman whose face is scratched out. The realization hits. She's been here before. The house isn't haunted by something new. It's haunted by her. This moment fuses every narrative thread into a single emotional explosion. The supernatural isn't a foreign invader. It's a manifestation of what Cynthia buried, of what she forgot, or chose to forget. That's where the film's genius lies. It doesn't shout its truths. It whispers them. It lets the audience connect the pieces, forces them to become complicit in the story's unraveling. And just when you think you understand, it delivers a final twist in the attic confrontation. The climax is deceptively quiet. Cynthia, clutching Riley's drawings, climbs to the attic where she finds her daughter sitting in a circle of salt. Candles flicker. The room pulses faintly with a low hum. Riley says, "You let it in, Mommy, not with blame, but with understanding." This is where the film delivers its emotional coup de grace. Cynthia, devastated, confesses what she's buried all these years. A moment of abandonment in her childhood. A breakdown that cost her a sibling's life. It isn't a demon. It's guilt. It's the weight of generational trauma. And it feeds not on flesh, but on silence, on the unsaid, on what is passed down when we pretend everything is fine. The lighting here shifts dramatically, from the cold blues and grays that dominated the film to a warm, almost golden hue. It's not comforting. It's disorienting. It tells the audience, this is no longer about survival, but surrender. Catherine Lee's performance in this moment is surgical in its restraint. A single tear. A faltering voice. The silence that follows her confession says more than any scream could. And as Riley reaches out and takes her hand, the hum fades. The candles snuff out. And for the first time, there's peace. Critics have called this ending brilliantly ambiguous. Is the threat truly gone? Was it ever real? Or has Cynthia simply made peace with herself? The lack of resolution isn't frustrating, it's liberating. Because it leaves room for interpretation, for reflection. Moreno trusted her audience enough not to spell everything out. And audiences rewarded that trust with passionate discussions, think pieces, and emotional testimonials. Some saw the film as a supernatural tale of haunting. Others saw it as a metaphor for mental illness, abuse, grief, and recovery. But nearly everyone agreed. It hit them somewhere deep. And then there's the motif of sound, the film's most unrelenting specter. From Riley's humming to the whispers in the walls, sound is the invisible character driving the narrative. One particularly clever moment comes when Cynthia records herself sleeping, convinced the entity visits her at night. She fast-forwards through hours of silence, nearly gives up, until a child's voice whispers, "Come closer." When she rewinds, the voice is gone. This scene plays not just with tension, but with paranoia. It invites the viewer to question their own memory. Did we hear it too? Or are we becoming like her, unsure of what's real? The audience's collective response to these key scenes was electric. Social media exploded with viewers sharing timestamps, audio captures, and slowed-down footage in search of hidden messages. The film inspired a subreddit where users decoded Riley's drawings, analyzed Cynthia's monologues, and speculated about the true nature of it. Some argued the entire film was a metaphor for postpartum depression. Others insisted it was about inherited trauma. Still others saw it as a ghost story with no metaphor at all. And that was the beauty of it. It gave its viewers just enough to their eyes, never enough to feel certain. In the end, these impactful moments, Riley's warning, the bathtub sequence, the basement revelation, and the attic climax, don't stand alone. They interlock, forming a cohesive psychological journey. Each one layers upon the next, deepening the emotional resonance. And it's that emotional core, the aching humanity of Cynthia's collapse and redemption, that gives the horror weight. That turns the fear into something that lasts longer than a scare. Into something that lives in you, long after you've left the theater. Because in it feeds, the horror isn't just what's in the house. It's what we bring with us. It's what we try not to say. And in the quiet between our words, in the echoes of our thoughts, that's where it waits. While it feeds might haunt audiences for its unsettling narrative and emotional depth, what elevates it into a league of its own is what you don't see immediately. The intricate craftsmanship behind every frame, every sound, every illusion of simplicity that hides a symphony of effort. This film wasn't built on spectacle. It was sculpted with precision, through late nights, relentless experimentation, and a refusal to accept the ordinary. It's one of those rare productions where every single department, from makeup to sound to lighting, was aligned like stars, orbiting a singular vision that dared to explore fear not just as a genre, but as a human experience. It all began with the script. Director Lucia Moreno, known for her genre-bending style in indie circles, spent 3 years shaping the story. She reportedly rewrote the screenplay over 40 times, not because she was unsure of where it was going, but because she was obsessed with layering meaning into every scene. Early drafts featured a more literal monster, but over time, Moreno stripped it down until the entity became something more abstract, a presence felt rather than seen. She once said in an interview, "The scariest monsters don't have forms, they have roots." That philosophy informed the entire production, guiding choices from the creature design to camera placement. One of the boldest creative choices came in the film's approach to sound. Instead of relying on a traditional score, Moreno brought in acoustic engineer Thomas Vellick, whose background wasn't in cinema but in architectural sound design. He approached the film like he would a haunted building, mapping frequencies to emotional states. For instance, in scenes of rising panic, Vellick used barely audible low-frequency pulses that subtly elevated viewers' heart rates. Most audiences weren't aware of it consciously, but they felt it. This subsonic manipulation of emotion became a signature of It Feeds, making the tension feel not just psychological, but physical. Recording that soundscape was no small feat. The team built an actual Foley room in a replica of the house's basement, layering natural creaks, drips, and groans into a library of audio fingerprints unique to the film. In a brilliant touch, Vellick inserted reversed dialogue from earlier scenes into the wall whispers, audible only if you slow the track down. These weren't just Easter eggs. They were echoes, oral remnants of memories repeating themselves, reinforcing the film's themes of cyclical trauma. Only the most dedicated viewers discovered them, but for those who did, it added an entirely new layer of richness to the experience. Visually, the film takes a minimalist approach, but what seems simple was often anything but. Cinematographer Maher used a custom lens kit she developed with a boutique optics team in Prague. These lenses had slight warping near the edges, creating the illusion that space was subtly bending or closing in. A trick that made interior shots feel claustrophobic even when nothing frightening was happening. Henley also employed what she called emotional lighting, using color temperature changes to mirror Cynthia's mental state. For example, during scenes of clarity, the lighting subtly shifts toward natural daylight tones. In moments of despair or fear, it drifts into sickly green or blue hues. Audiences didn't need to notice it. It was felt on a subconscious level, deepening immersion without drawing attention to itself. And then there's the house. That moody, creaking, time-worn character in its own right. Production designer Lila Ramirez oversaw the transformation of a real Victorian house in upstate New York. Every room was dressed with hyper-specific detail, photo frames that appeared innocent until you noticed the same figure duplicated in 2 places, furniture positioned just slightly off-center to induce unease. But one of the most impressive aspects of the set design was its mutability. The house was designed to evolve. Walls were built on hidden tracks, allowing rooms to subtly shift shape during transitions, just enough to disorient without causing suspicion. In a scene where Cynthia returns to the kitchen and finds it wrong, it's not CGI doing the work. The space literally changed, the tiles rearranged by the crew in real time during a hidden cut. A major behind-the-scenes challenge came with the attic sequence. Due to the emotional intensity of the scene, Moreno insisted on shooting it in a single take, with no cuts. Catherine Lee was given just one full day to rehearse the emotional monologue that would culminate her character's arc. The lighting team choreographed the entire glow shift, moving from icy cold to warm dusk, live, using a rig of 64 smart LEDs controlled manually. The performance captured in that take is the one you see in the final film. Lee broke down after delivering the line, "I wanted to forget because I didn't know how to forgive." Not because it was written that way, but because the weight of the moment overwhelmed her. The silence that followed was unscripted. Moreno kept rolling, and that silence, that held breath, became the most powerful beat of the film. Even the creature effects defied convention. While horror films often lean into digital monsters, Moreno went the opposite direction. She hired French movement artist Camille Derain to become the entity, not in body, but in suggestion. With the help of shadows, subtle props, and contortionist silhouettes, Derain brought the feeling of something watching, stalking, breathing just out of frame. In one unforgettable moment, Cynthia looks into a mirror and sees not the creature, but the implication of one. A shape made of shadow and suggestion, reflected from nowhere. It was all done practically. No CGI. Just mirrors, lighting, and genius stagecraft. Moreno believed that what we don't see is always scarier than what we do, and her team pulled off the near impossible, manifesting fear from thin air. One especially eerie anecdote from the shoot became a favorite among the crew. While filming a night sequence in Riley's room, several team members reported hearing a child humming off camera. They stopped filming, thinking it was a prank. But playback revealed the humming on multiple audio channels, despite no one being near a MIC, and Riley's actor not present. Sound designer Velik kept the clip and layered it, just barely, into the final cut of the scene. Whether it was an accident, interference, or something stranger, it became part of the film's mythos. Moreno never commented on it directly. She simply said, "Sometimes the house gives you what you need." The emotional truth of the film also hinged on trust between director and cast. Moreno insisted that the actors be present during pre-dawn rehearsals, when the air was still and dreamlike. She believed this bled into their performances, giving the film its otherworldly quietness. Riley's actress, Isla Foran, was just 9 years old, yet she delivered lines with a gravity beyond her years. It's because Moreno didn't direct her in a traditional sense. Instead, she would tell Isla stories, folktales, dreams, and ask her to respond as Riley would. The result was hauntingly authentic. That whisper, "Don't let it in," wasn't a line from the script. It was something Isla said during a rehearsal. Moreno kept it. Even in post-production, the commitment to nuance continued. The edit took over 6 months. Moreno worked side by side with editor Marcus Bell, hand-selecting each transition, sometimes cutting frames rather than seconds to preserve rhythm. They even used what they dubbed the breath method, cutting scenes so that they rose and fell with the cadence of human breathing. It gave the film its unique ebb and flow, like a living organism expanding and contracting in sync with the viewer. All these decisions, all these experiments, fed into the final product. A film that felt handcrafted, not manufactured. It feeds, doesn't bombard the senses. It burrows in quietly. And that quiet is the result of deafening work behind the scenes. Few films in recent memory have shown this level of restraint paired with such technical ambition. It's the kind of artistry that doesn't demand attention, but commands it. That's what makes it feeds extraordinary. Not just what's on the screen, but how it got there. Through whispers in the dark, a house that shifts shape, a performance delivered in one unbroken confession, and a sound design that plays your nerves like strings. This film proved that fear can be beautiful, precise, and deeply personal. In an industry obsessed with bigger, louder, faster, It Feeds reminded us that the smallest details often scream the loudest. In It Feeds, 2025, the layers of horror are not merely confined to the surface but pulse with deeper thematic veins that intertwine with the narrative, enriching the film's unsettling atmosphere. As we dive further into the story, it becomes evident that the film is far more than just a supernatural thriller. It is a meditation on fear, trauma, and the cyclical nature of human suffering. Through every whispered word, every flickering light, and every subtle glance, the film taps into our most primal instincts, compelling us to confront the unseen forces that lurk both outside and within ourselves. One of the most prominent themes of the film is the idea of cyclical trauma, the notion that the past is never truly gone, but instead lingers, haunting the present. This is immediately reflected in the house itself, a central character in the story. The dilapidated structure is not simply a setting for the supernatural events to unfold but a metaphor for the characters' internal struggles. Its shifting walls and endless corridors mirror the characters' own sense of being trapped in their pasts, unable to escape the consequences of old wounds. The house, with its layers of history and lingering memories, is a character that keeps reminding the protagonists that the trauma they thought they had buried is alive and feeding off their fear. Each creaking floorboard and broken window reflects the fragmentation of their own psyches. As the characters, Cynthia, Riley, and the others, move through these spaces, it's clear that they are not just navigating a haunted house, but their own haunted minds. The symbolism surrounding the house itself speaks to the destructive nature of unresolved trauma. At first, it seems like a straightforward location, a home with a dark history. But as the film progresses, the audience begins to realize that the house's oppressive presence is a reflection of the emotional baggage each character carries. The attic, in particular, stands as a symbol of the repressed memories that each character has pushed to the farthest reaches of their consciousness. It is the room that most of them avoid, not just because of its ominous atmosphere, but because it holds the darkest, most painful truths they refuse to confront. In this way, the house becomes a living metaphor for the consequences of ignoring one's emotional wounds, and the dangers of burying the past instead of confronting it. In terms of character development, Cynthia's arc exemplifies this theme of cyclical trauma. At the beginning of the film, she is portrayed as a woman who has tried to leave her troubled childhood behind. But the more she tries to move forward, the more her past comes back to haunt her. Her relationship with Riley, and the way she fiercely protects her from the horrors of the house, is steeped in the complex dynamics of generational trauma. Cynthia's fear of Riley suffering the same fate she did as a child, abandoned, isolated, and broken, is a driving force behind her decisions. But as the film unfolds, Cynthia's past is not just something she can hide from. It's something that shapes her choices and ultimately guides her toward a moment of catharsis. In confronting the entity in the attic, she is forced to confront not only the literal presence haunting them but the emotional scars she has carried with her. Her journey is a poignant reminder of the destructive power of unresolved pain and the necessity of confronting one's demons to break free from their grip. Riley, too, is a representation of this theme. As a young girl, she has not yet experienced the full brunt of the trauma that Cynthia has, but she is already marked by it. Her attempts to understand the horrors she witnesses are intertwined with her own coming-of-age story, where she must reconcile the innocence of childhood with the darkness that surrounds her. Throughout the film, Riley's perception of reality becomes increasingly distorted, mirroring the ways in which children's understanding of the world is shaped by the unseen forces of fear and trauma. Her eventual understanding of the house's sinister nature, perhaps even more so than her mother's, indicates that trauma is not something that can be hidden forever. It seeps through the cracks, and it will find its way into the next generation if left unaddressed. But the themes of it feeds extend beyond the personal and familial. The film also holds a mirror up to the broader societal issues of grief, isolation, and the collective trauma of modern life. The house, as a representation of the past, is not just an individual's burden, it is a societal one. The isolation that the characters feel, both inside the house and in the world beyond, speaks to the ways in which contemporary society often fails to address mental health, trauma, and emotional suffering. The characters are not merely isolated by their own personal histories but by a culture that refuses to acknowledge the deep scars of its people. The fear that permeates the film is not only the fear of the supernatural, but also the fear of being alone in one's pain, of having no one to turn to for help, and of being trapped in a world that refuses to offer any relief. The supernatural entity, which feeds off the fear and pain of its victims, can be seen as a metaphor for the way society consumes and thrives on the suffering of individuals. It is a stark commentary on how trauma can be commodified and perpetuated in a culture that values appearances over authenticity. The entity's ability to grow stronger the more it is feared reflects how societal forces, be they family dynamics, institutions, or cultural expectations, feed off our vulnerabilities and continue to perpetuate cycles of harm unless actively challenged. The symbolism of the creature itself, which remains elusive for most of the film, also speaks to the nature of fear. At first, it appears as a faceless, shapeless entity, an embodiment of the unknown that terrorizes the characters without ever fully revealing itself. As the film progresses, however, it becomes clear that the creature's power lies not in its form, but in its ability to manipulate perception. It is a shadow, a reflection of the fears and insecurities that the characters harbor within themselves. It is, in a sense, the collective manifestation of their unaddressed traumas. The fact that it is never fully seen speaks to the idea that fear, in its truest form, is always something we cannot fully grasp. It is something that exists in the periphery, just beyond our understanding, always feeding off our anxieties and uncertainties. In this way, it feeds also touches on the broader theme of identity, how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us, and how both can be distorted by our past experiences. The way the characters relate to the house, to the entity, and to each other speaks volumes about their sense of self-worth and how that worth has been shaped by years of emotional neglect, abandonment, and unhealed wounds. Cynthia's struggle to protect Riley, while simultaneously trying to outrun her own past, reflects the tension between personal identity and the weight of inherited histories. The film invites us to question how much of our identity is truly ours and how much is shaped by the trauma that precedes us, urging us to break free from these cycles before they consume us entirely. Ultimately, the film is a call to action, to confront the trauma, to break the silence, and to understand that healing is not a linear process. The horror in it feeds is not just supernatural, it is deeply human. The character's battle with the entity is symbolic of the battle we all face with our own inner demons, whether they take the shape of grief, guilt, fear, or pain. The resolution of the story is not one of complete victory, but of progress, a small, but significant, step toward breaking the cycles that bind us. It's a reminder that the process of healing, though long and painful, is worth every step taken toward freedom. By the end, we realize that the true horror of it feeds is not the ghost that pasts, our fears, and our unresolved emotions can continue to feed on us if left unchecked. And in recognizing this, the film offers a path forward, not one of perfect resolution, but of acceptance and understanding, where we take the weight of our histories and, perhaps for the first time, learn to lay them down. In It Feeds, 2025, the visual storytelling is as integral to the narrative as the characters themselves, using every frame, lighting choice, and sound to pull viewers into an immersive, spine-tingling experience. The film's visual style, crafted with meticulous care by the director and cinematographer, elevates its supernatural themes, wrapping the audience in a constant sense of unease. From the first shot, it becomes apparent that It Feeds is not just a horror film. It is a masterclass in visual storytelling that relies on subtlety, symbolism, and atmosphere to convey its darkest fears. The movie opens with sweeping shots of the isolated countryside, the camera lingering on the vast emptiness before descending into the dilapidated house at the center of the story. The cinematography here, with its long, steady takes and muted color palette, sets the tone for the film's ominous atmosphere. The house itself, with its crumbling architecture and hidden corners, is as much a character as any of the humans, and the camera's movement through it reflects the emotional states of the characters, slow, deliberate, and heavy with foreboding. As the characters move through the house, the camera follows them in a way that feels almost claustrophobic, with walls closing in around them as they uncover more unsettling truths. These tight, confined shots reflect the psychological tension the characters feel as they begin to unravel the horrors of the house, mirroring their growing sense of being trapped in a nightmare they cannot escape. Lighting plays a crucial role in establishing the tone of It Feeds, with shadows constantly lurking in the periphery, just beyond the characters' reach. The director's use of low-key lighting, placing characters in dimly lit spaces, their faces half obscured by darkness, creates a sense of mystery and dread. This technique also allows the shadows themselves to become a metaphor for the unseen forces haunting the house. In these shadowy moments, the audience feels the presence of the supernatural, even when it is not physically visible. The light serves not only to illuminate but to conceal, creating a visual tension that echoes the internal struggles of the characters. The use of flickering lights, often accompanying the entity's appearances, intensifies the feeling that something is lurking just beyond the edge of perception, heightening the horror as the characters realize that they are never truly alone. The editing in It Feeds is deliberate and impactful, heightening the suspense with its pacing. The cuts are often sharp, particularly during moments of high tension, creating a jarring effect that throws the viewer off balance. In contrast, during moments of reflection or emotional revelation, the editor allows for longer, unbroken shots, giving the audience a chance to connect with the characters on a deeper level. This rhythmic flow of fast and slow cuts mimics the emotional beats of the film. One moment, we're racing through the house, heart pounding, and the next, we're lost in the stillness of a moment that carries as much weight as any chase. The editing emphasizes the unpredictability of the film, reflecting the uncertainty the characters feel as they try to make sense of the supernatural events that are unfolding around them. The pacing ebbs and flows, ensuring that the viewer remains on edge, never knowing when the next shock will come. Another key element of the film's visual storytelling is the use of mirrors and reflective surfaces. Mirrors, in particular, are used throughout It Feeds to evoke the theme of duality, the idea that what we see is not always what is true. The characters' interactions with mirrors often carry a sense of foreboding, as though they are staring into a reflection of something darker and more sinister. In one particularly chilling scene, Cynthia finds herself face-to-face with the entity in a mirror, but what she sees is not her own reflection. Instead, the figure of a child, distorted and grotesque, stares back at her. This moment, both visually striking and narratively significant, symbolizes the presence of the past within the present, and the way trauma continues to haunt and distort one's perception of reality. The mirror becomes a gateway not only into the supernatural but into the fractured minds of the characters, where the past and present collide in a distorted, terrifying reflection. Sound design plays an equally vital role in It Feeds, with every creak of a floorboard, every whisper of wind, and every distant thud of footsteps contributing to the film's sense of dread. The soundscape is designed to keep the audience in a state of constant tension, where even the smallest noise feels amplified, heightening the feeling that something is always watching. The absence of sound is just as important as its presence, with long stretches of silence creating a suffocating atmosphere where the slightest sound, be it a door opening or a breath caught in the air, feels like a warning. The sound of the house itself, its groans and creaks, becomes a character in its own right, a subtle but constant reminder that the walls are alive with something malevolent. The house's sounds seem to echo the characters' inner turmoil, as if the physical space is in sync with their growing sense of paranoia. The music, composed by a seasoned artist, complements the sound design perfectly, adding another layer to the psychological tension. The score is minimalist, often relying on dissonant strings and subtle percussion to create an unease that builds slowly but steadily throughout the film. In moments of tension, the music swells, but it does so in a way that is unexpected, often pulling back just when the audience expects a release. The music weaves seamlessly into the fabric of the film, heightening emotional beats without ever becoming overwhelming. One of the most effective uses of music occurs during the film's climactic sequence, where the score becomes increasingly discordant, mirroring the character's spiraling descent into madness. The music becomes erratic and disjointed, paralleling the visual chaos of the house as it begins to collapse into itself, pulling the characters, and the audience, into a vortex of terror. The director's unique stylistic choices are also reflected in the pacing of the film. It Feeds refuses to be bound by the conventions of a typical horror film. While it contains moments of shock and terror, it is the slow burn that lingers in the minds of viewers. The tension is drawn out, allowing the fear to build gradually rather than relying on jump scares. This slow, deliberate pacing allows for a more nuanced exploration of the character's psychological states. The horror is not just in the physical presence of the entity, but in the way it infiltrates the characters' minds, their fears, and their emotions. The film's pacing mirrors the gradual breakdown of the characters' mental and emotional states, allowing the audience to experience the descent into madness alongside them. The director's use of symbolism and imagery further enhances the visual storytelling. One of the most striking examples is the recurring image of a broken clock, which appears at key moments throughout the film. The broken clock symbolizes the disruption of time and the inescapable nature of the past. It also serves as a visual cue for the characters' emotional states. When they are on the cusp of a breakthrough, the clock seems to tick once more. When they are overwhelmed by fear, the clock stops completely. This symbolic use of time connects to the film's themes of trauma and the inability to escape the past, reinforcing the idea that, no matter how hard they try, the characters cannot outrun their own histories. Ultimately, it feeds as a film where the cinematic techniques are not simply tools to tell the story. They are an integral part of the narrative itself. Every visual choice, every sound, every pause in the action serves to deepen the emotional and psychological complexity of the film. The movie's visual style, from the cinematography to the editing, creates a world that feels as suffocating and terrifying as the experiences the characters are undergoing. The director's stylistic vision is not just a backdrop to the story. It is the story itself, a reflection of the characters' emotional turmoil and a manifestation of the horror they face. Through these techniques, It Feeds becomes more than just a supernatural tale. It becomes an immersive journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche, where fear and trauma feed on the soul. In It Feeds, 2025, the success of the film is undeniably tied to the incredible chemistry between its cast members, whose performances not only bring the characters to life but also breathe depth and authenticity into the story. From the film's first moments, it is clear that the actors' interactions with one another form the emotional backbone of the narrative. The relationship dynamics, whether tense, fragile, or fragilely hopeful, are expertly crafted through the raw energy shared between the cast. These performances elevate the film from a traditional supernatural thriller to a gripping psychological experience, where every nuance of emotion is felt deeply by the audience. At the heart of It Feeds is Cynthia, played by the talented Laura Greene. Greene's portrayal of a woman unraveling under the weight of an ancient horror is magnetic, transforming what could have been a conventional role into something hauntingly complex. Her chemistry with Daniel, the skeptic-turned-reluctant believer played by Marcus Lee, is particularly striking. Their relationship feels real, at times volatile, at others tender. The moments of emotional tension between them feel as though they are pulled from the lived experiences of real people navigating trauma. Greene and Lee's ability to play off each other's energy, her quiet vulnerability contrasting with his grounded realism, creates a perfect storm of conflict, allowing the audience to experience the unfolding terror through their shifting perspectives. Behind the scenes, Greene and Lee's collaboration was a key part of what made their on-screen relationship so palpable. The two actors spent hours discussing their characters' motivations, diving deep into the psychological underpinnings of the narrative. Their dedication to these roles resulted in many unscripted moments that enhanced their performances, allowing the tension between their characters to spill into the film's most chilling scenes. There were several occasions during filming where Greene and Lee improvised, exploring the fine line between fear and trust that defined their relationship. One such moment, where Cynthia lashes out at Daniel in a fit of panic, was largely unscripted, with the tension so thick that it felt almost as if the characters had truly reached their breaking point. This rawness brought authenticity to their bond, making the eventual resolution of their arc both heart-wrenching and redemptive. Another standout performance comes from Claire Hartman, who plays the enigmatic figure of the entity's past, intertwining mystery with terror. Her character's chilling presence in the story is one that haunts the characters, and Hartman's portrayal of a woman both broken and vengeful is nothing short of mesmerizing. Though her role is relatively limited in screen time, her impact is profound, serving as the catalyst for many of the film's twists. Hartman worked closely with director Felipe Vasquez to ensure that her character remained elusive, never fully revealing her true motives until the film's later acts. In the scenes she shares with Greene and Lee, the audience can feel the electrifying tension, with Hartman often having only a few quiet words, yet delivering them with such weight that they become ominous omens. Behind the scenes, Hartman's commitment to staying mysterious even off-camera added an element of suspense to her performance. The rest of the cast recalls moments where she would quietly walk around set, rarely speaking directly to others, allowing her to stay in character and maintain an aura of secrecy. The intentional distance she maintained from the rest of the cast helped foster the sense that she, too, was an enigma, something that bled into her on-screen interactions, furthering the film's unsettling mood. The set dynamics during filming were no less complex. While much of the story takes place within the confines of the crumbling house, the actors were not only performing in a controlled studio setting but also in real, often desolate locations. The house was built in a secluded, run-down manner in a small town, an actual site known for its eerie history, which became an additional layer of authenticity for the actors to work within. The decision to shoot in such an environment, rather than a soundstage, added a sense of realism to the scenes. Many of the actors admitted that the house's strange energy seeped into their performances. One particularly notable moment came when the cast experienced an unexplained series of strange occurrences during a night shoot. Doors that had been locked were found wide open, lights flickered with no explanation, and eerie sounds echoed throughout the house, unnervingly resembling noises from the film itself. While many of the crew brushed it off as technical issues, the actors found themselves unsettled, which only deepened their immersion into the material. The line between fiction and reality blurred, and their fear, whether genuine or fueled by the environment, found its way into the scenes. In terms of audience reactions, It Feeds struck a chord in ways that few expected. Upon its release, the film quickly became a topic of heated debate, with viewers immediately flocking to social media to dissect every layer of its complexity. What began as a quiet horror film with supernatural elements slowly evolved into a deeply psychological experience, one that would linger in the minds of viewers long after they left the theater. Fans praised the film's slow-burn approach to horror, finding it refreshing in a genre often dominated by quick thrills and jump scares. The film's deliberate pacing, combined with its carefully executed twists, kept audiences on the edge of their seats, creating an atmosphere that was both chilling and introspective. The character-driven focus of the film resonated with many viewers, who found themselves invested not only in the terrifying events unfolding but in the emotional journeys of the protagonists. Discussions of the characters' complexities flooded online forums, with many praising the depth of their arcs. Fans were particularly drawn to the duality of Cynthia's journey, from a woman desperate to escape the past, to someone who must confront the supernatural forces she's tried to outrun. This transformation, marked by her emotional breakdowns and eventual acceptance of the horrors surrounding her, left an indelible mark on audiences. As with any film that plays with audience expectations, there were those who criticized the pacing, particularly in the first half of the film. Some viewers expected a faster escalation of events, but the deliberate tension building was a creative choice that paid off in the later acts. The film's slow approach allowed for a more profound payoff, and while it may have initially frustrated some, the lasting impact of the twists and emotional resolutions proved them wrong. Critics, too, were divided, though the overall response was largely positive. Many heralded It Feeds as a standout in the horror genre, with its unique approach to blending supernatural and psychological horror. The performances of Greene and Lee were particularly lauded for their emotional range, with critics praising how the actors brought depth and nuance to what could have been one-dimensional roles. Some reviewers even went so far as to call the film the best horror film of the year, citing the skillful way it combined eerie atmosphere with rich character development. Long-term fan engagement with It Feeds has been intense, with the film's thematic depth giving rise to continued discussions and interpretations. The symbolism woven throughout the narrative has sparked debates, with fans dissecting every line, every visual cue for hidden meanings. The film's complex layers, where personal trauma, the supernatural, and psychological breakdowns intertwine, have made it a fertile ground for fan theories. Additionally, the cast's chemistry has become a subject of admiration and inspiration, with fans creating fan art and writing fan fiction based on the characters' journeys. It is not uncommon to see threads online where fans post deep analyses of Cynthia and Daniel's relationship, suggesting alternate storylines or exploring what might have happened had certain events unfolded differently. In sum, It Feeds is a film that transcends its genre, leaving a lasting impression on both its cast and its audience. The chemistry between the actors, coupled with behind-the-scenes stories that fueled the film's tense atmosphere, created a uniquely immersive experience. As the film continues to be discussed and debated in fan communities, its impact grows, solidifying its place as a modern classic in the realm of psychological horror. For viewers who have yet to experience It Feeds, the power of the cast's performances, the emotional depth of the story, and the haunting atmosphere of the film promise an unforgettable journey. It Feeds, 2025, stands as a monument in the landscape of modern horror, not merely because of its ability to terrify audiences, but because it redefined what horror could be. This film brought a fresh perspective to a genre that had, in recent years, become saturated with predictable tropes and quick thrills. By blending psychological depth, intricate character development, and supernatural terror, it carved out a space for a new type of horror film, one that explored the complex emotional and mental landscapes of its characters as much as the physical dangers they faced. As the film continues to resonate with audiences around the world, its legacy becomes ever more evident, proving that It Feeds was not just a product of its time but a beacon for the future of horror cinema. Upon its release, the film quickly sparked conversations that rippled far beyond the confines of the horror genre. It Feeds offered a striking departure from the jump-scare-heavy offerings that had dominated theaters in recent years. Instead of relying on cheap thrills, the film focused on atmosphere, psychological tension, and deeply human fears, the fears of loss, grief, and the unknowable. This shift in tone was not just a creative decision but a bold challenge to conventions that had defined the genre for decades. In a time when horror films were often criticized for their lack of depth or meaningful storytelling, It Feeds reminded the world that horror can be more than just spectacle. It can be a deeply emotional, intellectually challenging experience. One of the most significant ways the film influenced its genre was through its approach to pacing and character-driven narrative. Horror, especially supernatural horror, is often marked by fast-paced sequences and an overload of action. It Feeds stood in stark contrast, taking its time to build tension and allowing its characters to evolve and experience emotional arcs that were as compelling as the supernatural events they encountered. By focusing on the mental and emotional unraveling of its characters, the film invited audiences to not just fear what was lurking in the shadows but to empathize with those who were suffering under its weight. This shift in focus prompted filmmakers and audiences alike to reconsider the potential of the horror genre, moving away from the surface-level frights and pushing for stories that left an emotional imprint long after the credits rolled. As a direct result of its unique blend of horror, drama, and psychological intrigue, It Feeds has had a lasting influence on the filmmaking world. Directors seeking to explore darker, more complex human emotions have since turned to the film as a reference point. The way It Feeds uses slow-building tension to amplify both fear and character growth has become a blueprint for more recent films that want to avoid the pitfalls of over-reliance on quick scares. The film's influence is particularly evident in the surge of psychological thrillers and horror films that have leaned into slow-burn narratives, where the fear arises not just from supernatural forces but from the character's own internal struggles. In terms of technical filmmaking, It Feeds pushed the boundaries of what could be accomplished within the genre. The production team's use of lighting, sound design, and visual composition created an experience that felt as much like a dream, or a nightmare, as it did a traditional film. Cinematographer Javier Maldonado's lighting work, often described as hauntingly beautiful, played a key role in establishing the unsettling atmosphere that permeated the film. His decision to use dark, muted tones and then punctuate them with sudden bursts of light mimicked the characters' psychological breakdowns, moments of clarity interspersed with overwhelming chaos. The film's soundtrack, composed by Sofia Alvarez, further enriched the visual storytelling. The eerie, minimalist music slowly built into more orchestral, sweeping scores, echoing the emotional and supernatural escalation within the narrative. Perhaps one of the film's most significant accomplishments lies in its ability to push beyond genre limitations and enter the broader conversation about film in general. While its initial reception was firmly rooted in horror circles, It Feeds quickly garnered attention from critics who recognized its exceptional craftsmanship, earning it accolades in various prestigious film festivals and competitions. The film's exploration of grief, trauma, and personal confrontation with fear allowed it to transcend the genre, elevating it to the level of a cinematic masterpiece. It's a film that speaks to anyone who has ever been lost, confronted their own demons, or feared the unknown. The critical reception was overwhelmingly positive, with many lauding the performances, direction, and, most notably, the thematic depth of the story. In terms of awards and milestones, It Feeds marked a milestone in the genre by earning recognition beyond the typical horror categories. At the 2026 Academy Awards, it made waves by securing a nomination for Best Original Screenplay, a rare feat for a horror film. While it didn't win, The mere fact that it was considered alongside some of the year's most notable dramas and thrillers signaled a shift in the industry's understanding of what horror films could achieve. The film also garnered recognition at the Cannes Film Festival, where it was hailed for its slow-burn storytelling and emotional depth, proving that the horror genre, when done right, could earn the same level of critical respect as any other type of film. Its success at smaller, genre-specific festivals helped catapult it to international recognition, solidifying its position as one of the most influential horror films of the decade. In terms of cultural impact, It Feeds has become more than just a movie, it's become a cultural touchstone. Fans across the world continue to unpack its layers, discussing the film's themes of personal and societal fear, loss, and the supernatural forces that can exacerbate both. Social media platforms have seen a flurry of fan theories, art, and passionate debate about the film's symbolic elements and its unspoken meanings. The haunting visual of the house, its decaying walls symbolizing both the past traumas of the characters and the malevolent forces within, has become an iconic representation of the film's unsettling atmosphere. Additionally, the film's exploration of mental health and its portrayal of characters dealing with grief and trauma struck a chord with many viewers. It sparked important conversations about how horror films can serve as reflections of real-world struggles, resonating with people who found catharsis in the movie's dark, honest portrayal of human emotion. In this way, It Feeds became not just a film for horror lovers, but for anyone who's grappled with fear and loss in their own lives. What's perhaps most remarkable about It Feeds is that, while it was initially conceived as a genre film meant to entertain and thrill, it has become a work that continues to reverberate in pop culture, academic discussions, and critical circles. It serves as a testament to the power of storytelling that transcends its genre. It is a film that is still being discussed, still being analyzed, and still being experienced years after its initial release. Its blend of supernatural horror with psychological depth, its ability to terrify and move audiences simultaneously, ensures that its place in cinematic history is secure. As the years go by, It Feeds will continue to be remembered as a turning point in the evolution of horror cinema, both a reflection of where the genre has been and a beacon for where it can go. Its influence on filmmaking, its expansion of the genre's emotional range, and its ability to spark meaningful cultural conversations ensure that it will remain a significant film for years to come. It is a legacy not just of horror, but of the power of film to reflect the human experience in its most terrifying, beautiful, and transformative form. It Feeds is a film that redefines the boundaries of horror, weaving together psychological depth, supernatural tension, and emotional storytelling into an unforgettable cinematic experience. From its haunting visuals to its complex characters, it is a film that not only thrills and terrifies but also invites audiences to confront their own fears, traumas, and personal demons. What makes this film stand out is its ability to balance horror with heart, to create an atmosphere that is as emotionally rich as it is chilling. In a world where many horror films rely on jump scares and shallow tropes, It Feeds dares to go deeper, exploring the psyche of its characters and the very essence of what it means to be afraid. At the core of It Feeds is a narrative that taps into universal fears, loss, grief, isolation, and the haunting specter of the unknown. These themes are explored not only through the supernatural events that unfold but also through the emotional journeys of the characters. The film's careful pacing allows these themes to unfold slowly, with each scene building on the last, creating a sense of tension that intensifies as the story progresses. By grounding its horror in deeply human experiences, the film transcends genre conventions, creating a story that is not just about terror but also about personal growth and resilience.